Should we talk about OSs that we enjoy?
Oh, yes. Let's talk about OS.
Greetings and welcome to the Computer Studies Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Stephen Elliot, and I have with me this evening
Daniel Errico.
And Brett Hedeman.
And Daniel, you are a
senior in the Computer Studies Department, and I am studying networking and security as my track.
Excellent. And Brett?
I am in computer informations, and I'm probably going to choose networking and security as my track. And I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore. A super sophomore, though.
Super sophomore.
I'm a junior senior.
All right, so what are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about operating systems.
We are going to talk about...
So let's talk first about the operating systems that we have used. Can you list them all, Daniel?
All the ones that I've used. I started with Windows XP all the way through Vista. Definitely did not do 8.0. Oh, I did 7. That comes first. 7, I did 8.1. Now I'm on Windows 10. I also have used Mac OS X from... I don't remember how many of them, but there were quite a few.
Leopard or Snow Leopard?
I probably started Snow Leopard.
Okay. 10.6.
Mm-hmm. All the way up to Capitan, and then my Mac is not working right now, so
That's a bummer. It's very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And I've used a few Linux distros. What's it called? CentOS, Debian,
Ubuntu Kali.
Ubuntu Raspbian.
Mm-hmm.
That's the fun one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, whole bunch. Server stuff too.
What kind of servers?
Well, there's ESXi, which runs on the server, and then the actual server operating systems running on the ESXi are Windows Server 2012, 2016, and I think those are the only two that I've used.
Okay. Brett, what operating systems have you?
I have used Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 2000.
That was one of them.
Yep.
I don't know if you've used it or not.
No, it was. I know it's one of them.
Uh-huh.
I was making sure it didn't have a different name. I used Windows XP, which I thought was the most amazing thing back in my day.
It was.
Windows Vista, which I didn't use much because it sucked. And then Windows 7.
You might have to keep the commentary too.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to Vista. Ugh.
Can we talk about 8.0 though?
Windows 7, I use Windows 8.1, Windows 10, Windows RT, and Windows S.
Windows S.
It is a new Chrome-like operating system with all Windows Store apps based. That's all you can download. It's highly secure and highly light. It's much lighter than the full Windows.
Okay.
So it's a Chromebook, but for Windows.
It's like a Chrome. It's the same. It's Windows.
It's a Windows install where you can only use apps from the App Store.
So it's lighter, but it's the same feel and
Like
it looks
it has
the same.
some uses.
It's better than
That's
Chrome,
about it?
I'd say. Anyway, let me continue. I've used Chrome OS, 3 different versions, but they all look the same, so you can't really tell. I used Mac OS X 10.5, 10.6, 10.7, 10.8, 10.9, 10.10.
You could have just given us a range.
OS High Sierra and OS Sierra, those flipped around. I also used Chrome OS, like I said, and I've used Linux and Ubuntu. And I think that's it.
Yeah, you set up an Ubuntu Live machine the other day. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
And I also used this really weird Japanese operating system that I did not understand. It was totally crazy. No clue what it was. But
Why and how did you use it?
it was in high school, and my friend's like, "Ooh, you should come try this." And I'm like, "This looks really cool." And he's like, "Yeah, but it's in Japanese, so you can't understand it." I'm like, "Oh, this is super cool." So we played with it for like an hour, and then I was done.
He was talking about a Nintendo Wii that was set to Japanese.
Have you used Wii OS?
Totally Wii OS.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brett, I think you certainly spread the gamut of operating systems there from 95 all the way up to 10.
Impressive.
And I did use Windows 3.0. 3.1.
For workgroups? Windows for workgroups?
No, I just tried it out the other day on a
The virtual machine?
virtual machine.
Yeah.
Oh, don't want to forget this. Windows 2008, Windows Server 2008, with the new hypervisor V client, or what's it? Hyper-V. That was like the first year that they really put it out as an update on Windows 8 server 2018. 2008 server. edition. So
Yeah, Hyper-V was 2008. That was the first major implementation of it. So.
I've actually never used Hyper-V.
it was super cool, and I did a presentation on it, so I know everything there is to know about it.
Be careful with those kind of claims.
It's just like subnetting. You take intro to NetSec, and you're just like, oh, I know what subnetting is. And then you take a Cisco class, and you don't know what subnetting is.
Never ever say that I know what subnetting is.
I don't know. I'm actually pretty proud of my intro to NetSec students right now. The way they're picking it up, I think they're going to do well. Very cool. Very cool. Let's see. So you guys mentioned a bunch that you used. Windows Millennium Edition. Either of you guys touch Windows NT?
Yep. Windows NT.
It was essentially Windows 98 upgraded to a downgrade.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, like Vista.
It was a hype and exciting, but
Yeah,
it was
very
not
much.
good.
No, it was worse
And
than
8.0?
Vista, and yet not as bad as Vista. So 8.0 was pretty disappointing. Microsoft really tried to make too many changes all in one go. On that one.
What Windows Millennium Edition reminds me of is when Apple tried putting out a Mac Millennium computer. And it was like this super cool design, but it totally sucked. And it was like the first thing with flat screen, and it had this little like circular cube for the computer.
Nice.
And everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful and amazing, but it cost like $1,400 at the time and did not work.
A cube with rounded edges.
Okay.
There you go.
Circular cube.
Did I say that?
You did say
Circular cube?
Square. Circle.
Okay. Like I said, English is not my forte.
When did you say that? Did you say that last week?
I said that last
I think you said
episode.
last week,
Last
yeah.
episode.
That was a while ago.
Let's move on.
Wow, you're wearing the same shirt.
Always for the podcast, man.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately,
I always wear this on Thursdays, so.
So we did a string of episodes, game tutorials. We did Halo, we did Artemis, we did a couple of map walkthroughs, and I was wearing the wrong shirt for all of those episodes.
Oh.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. But back at it, back in Classroom G, using the right shirt, using the right stuff. So, very good. Cool. So of all these operating systems that you guys have used over the years, I'll go ahead and entertain Brett's desire to talk about preferences. What was your favorite operating system at any given time?
I will tell you.
Totally with Daniel, as far as Windows XP was the best thing that ever happened.
Honestly, I have to say, when I first touched Windows XP, I was young, knew nothing about computers, but we had an old computer and that's what it ran. And I was like, I had used Windows 98 because my dad had an old computer, and I was like, even at a young age, I said, this is not great. It's ugly. And then Windows XP came out with the blue bar and the little green start button. And it was like beautiful. I felt like I really got into the art of computers, like artistic stuff.
Yeah, the GUI.
Which is where graphical user interface, in case you didn't know that, which is where my love for Apple started to come in.
Oh, XP
because
created your love for Apple.
Kind of, but Apple was not something I ever could touch because my parents never would pay that much money for a computer. So I was like, oh, this sucks. Well, I had started watching the news one night, and I heard about Steve Jobs, and this was like in 2006, I think.
Okay.
And so I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to look him up. And I looked him up, and I saw these computers. I'm like, whoa, my computer's really ugly and tan, but these computers are like beautiful, and they're really creative and cool. And so I got like super excited about that. And then I heard like Steve Jobs' story, how, even though he struggled when he was younger, he still was successful. And that just motivated me to really want to be successful in the world, no matter what area I went into. And I just really started getting a passion for Apple, and because they're beautiful, and I just love the story. And it was really what kicked off my love for computers. So that's why I like Apple, and I prefer Chrome OS because everything is correct. I'm not Chrome OS. Crap.
I was gonna say.
We switched gears.
I was on a groove. I was really in a groove. No, but I really love Mac OS because even since the old models like Tiger, everything has just worked, and it works correctly, and they do it right. They don't cut corners or anything, and I just love that. And
just works.
even the fonts, the built-in fonts are beautiful. Like everything is just down to the finest little detail. Loved it. And I just fell in love with Apple and everything that nowadays, now that Steve Jobs is dead, it's a little different, but it's still pretty awesome.
Daniel, you were a Mac user for a time.
I was. So I started out in XP Windows 7. And then around 2011, I think, because I had an iPad, that kind of got me onto the Mac side. And so I got a MacBook Pro because I had a gift card and academic discount and all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I never would have bought it.
I wish I could have that.
But I got a MacBook Pro, and I was mainly Apple user for probably 5 or 6 years. I really do like the user interface for Apple because it's just such a pretty thing to look at, and they put a lot of effort into their designs, and like Brett was saying, how the edges are rounded and the fonts are pretty and everything like that. So I like the user interface. I liked using it because it was good for running like photo editing and video editing kind of stuff. I used Final Cut for some stuff, but then coming to Emmaus, I brought my MacBook with me, didn't have a Windows computer, and then going into the computer major in 2016, I started using Windows computers all the time because that's what we have in the computer lab, and I kind of got a little bit more familiar with it again. I mean, I had used Windows 8.1 and now Windows 10. And I started liking Windows a lot more and more because of the customization ability and just all sorts of different things that you could do that seemed more intuitive than the Mac, because the Mac kind of tries to hide all of the internal functions from you just so that you can get a pretty desktop.
And so that it works.
And so it works, so you don't mess everything up.
You don't break it.
But with Windows, it's easier if you know what you're doing to change how it works and make it work for you. And so I do like Windows right now, and I am getting more into Linux. I want to have just a Linux computer, not running as a virtual machine, just a Linux computer, so I can try to use that as a main. Yeah, I've tried Raspberry Pi.
That'd be a phenomenal computer.
Did I tell you I had too many tabs open on my Raspberry Pi and it started overheating?
Oh, no.
It was like 5 tabs.
That was super funny.
Do you have a 3 or 2?
3B, so it's a 1 gigahertz processor with 1 gig of memory.
Yeah.
I do like Linux, though. It's fun, especially once you learn the command line. Then once you know what you're doing with it, there's so much you can actually do and learn and download and figure it out.
It's funny you say that once you know the command line, because my experience with Linux was start up Linux, Control-Alt-T to get a terminal, and that's where you live. So like the GUI of Linux was never a thing. It was always terminal for me. And so that was all that I ever used Linux. So it's always funny to me when people open up Ubuntu and use it as a graphical operating system, like looking at the apps to find terminal and stuff like that. It's like, no. Yeah, it's not a GUI. Don't use it as a GUI. It is a GUI. It actually has a very nice GUI. But my entire experience was command line.
We could talk about GUIs, though, because I don't like a lot of the Linux GUIs that are out there. Because they have I'm so used to Windows and Mac having the command bar on the bottom, but then you go Linux and it's on the top or it's on the side. Yeah. I don't like that. So what I would do is I would
move it.
You can move it, but I mean, still, you could take Ubuntu and you can make it look like Mac OS. So you have a pretty computer that works, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff with.
And for anyone who doesn't know this, if you're watching this, Mac OS's foundation is actually in Ubuntu, correct? Or Linux?
No,
Linux?
okay. It's Linux.
Linux, that's what I meant. That's
it's not.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say, Linux. But I downloaded a version of Linux and on a virtual machine, and I'm like, wow, this looks very similar to Mac OS. I'm like, how on earth can they do that? And somebody explained to me that, it's all kind of the same basis.
Mac OS X is actually a branch off of the Linux, or rather, more appropriately, the Unix kernel.
Isn't that because it started off as kind of like a, what's it called? Back in the day when they started developing the original Mac OS and the Finder and everything, it kind of started as like homebrew.
More or less, but I mean, Linux was the foundation of a ton of operating systems back there. It made sense. I mean, DOS was the other side of things. So Microsoft went off of DOS, and Mac OS went off of Unix and whatnot, and then there sprung all of the other variations of Linux and whatnot. Well, thank you guys for sharing a bit about operating systems and which ones you prefer and why and whatnot. What do you guys like? Leaving some comments below which operating systems you guys like. I like them all, but I will say Windows 10, you know why?
It just works.
Why?
Just like Apple, it works well.
Mass Effect 3. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
That's all that was?